I don't know what to think about this one. I guess I should give some context and start at the beginning. I'll do my best to describe what had just happened. Recently, my brother Zach has really gotten into nature photography, and last weekend we decided to go camping so he could take some pictures. We live on the far east coast, so finding places far from cities is actually pretty difficult. Luckily, Zach found what seemed like the perfect place on Google Maps. The maps showed a wide open clearing right next to a road. It looked like a few hours worth of drive, but we decided to give it a shot. I packed up my gear and we brought our dog Major. My brother loaded the car with his camera equipment and off we set towards the spot. As we got close, I saw that the paved roads ended, and an old no trespassing sign was hanging on a rusted gate. I could see a long dirt road curve right out into the woods behind it. We didn't want to trespass, but we'd driven so far. I asked my brother Zach what he thought, and he figured that the road and the land was probably just the property of some lumber company. It sounded about right to me. We noticed that the gate blocking the road wasn't even locked, and that pretty much sealed the deal. Something brought us here. Zach jumped out and opened the car door to unload the things. After that, we found the spot without too much trouble. It was pretty much perfect, at first, to say the least. We unloaded our firewood and pretty soon had a good blaze going in the middle of the clearing. Major was running around sniffing everything, looking like he was having the time of his life. Major was our pet bull. We've had him in our family for almost 5 years. He was a good dog, if not a little dumb. I love that dog more than most people. He had helped me through a lot of difficult times. Soon, though, it was dark. We had read online that there would be a thick cloud cover that night, and of course the prediction was pretty spot on. It seemed like the clouds were thick logs just brushing over the tops of the trees. The only light for miles came from our little fire. So I started making dinner wrapped in tinfoil. My brother Zach was holding his camera, taking some pictures of an owl that was sitting on a tree in the distance. Shortly after, he dropped his camera, letting it hang from his neck strap. He looked at me and complained about feeling a bit uneasy. I figured he was just being anxious and didn't put much thought into it while I put together the food. Suddenly, though, silence rang out through the trees. I realized that might not make much sense, but let me explain. If any of you have ever gone camping in the forest, you know there's almost constant sound of crickets, frogs, and the occasional owl, if not just wildlife. It all stopped in a split second. I stood up from my chair and looked into the woods. A distinct clicking sound came echoing into the clearing. Put your thumbnail behind your front tooth and pull it until it makes a hard clack. That was the sound that came in bursts. 3 clicks and then silence. 5 clicks, silence. It sounded wrong somehow, like nails on a chalkboard or a fork screeching across a china plate. I can't explain it, but the click mixed with the silence made the hairs on my neck stand up. Major, our dog, jumped up and stared towards the sound. I could see how tense he was. He began barking like crazy. Major has always been an increasingly easygoing dog. Seeing him freak out like this was something I've never seen before. Before we could do anything, he bolted towards the sound. I jumped up and chased after him at the edge of the clearing, but he was too fast. I reached the tree line and disappeared into the darkness. I stopped at the edge of the clearing, breathing hard. Zach was close behind me, his camera bouncing on its strap. The clicking stopped, however, and the chirping of crickets rang out again through the woods. At the edge of the clearing, I began shouting for Major, but I heard nothing in response. Zach stood staring into the woods uneasily. He asked me what I thought the clicking noise was. I told him that I had no idea. I pulled out my flashlight and told him we needed to go after Major. He looked less than happy, but agreed. I turned back into the woods and started walking in a direction that Major had taken off. After just a few minutes of walking, the light of the small fire was completely blocked by the trees. The only light source that I can see was my flashlight. The woods seemed almost too dark. The thick clouds and remote location gave the woods an almost physical blackness. It reminded me of when I went caving a few years back. Zach and I kept calling out to Major. After a few minutes, I heard a faint whimpering sound. I called for Zach to stop walking and we listened. Zach nodded and whispered,
"Yeah, that's Major. Up ahead."
We pushed on. Up in the distance, I saw a clearing in the trees. In the middle of it, I saw a huge concrete building. Decades old, graffiti covered the sides. It looked completely out of place in the middle of the woods. I pointed my flashlight at the ground around us. Neither me nor my brother could see any roads that led up to the building. My brother Zach lifted his camera and took a picture. The flash lit up the clearing like a strike of lightning. While we stood there, I thought I heard the sounds of Major whimpering again. They sounded like they were coming from inside the building, so we started walking towards the building. Zach called out,
"Hang on, man. Let's think about this for a second."
I got pretty mad. I wanted to get my dog, who was scared and alone in this creepy building. I told Zach he was being ridiculous, especially if he was scared of some clicking noise. He whispered back to me,
"All I'm saying is let's just be careful, all right? No sense in running and cutting a leg open on a rusty piece of metal."
Looking back now, I wish I had the sense to listen to him. We walked towards the building. A heavy metal door hung from its hinges in the front of the building. I heard my brother Zach step through the door behind me as I was making my way deeper into the structure. The floor and the walls of the hallway were all made of rough concrete. I saw graffiti that must have been decades old covering the walls. The end of the hallway turned to the right. As I made the turn, I saw a pool of something discolored on the ground. The heavy stench of decay hit me like a wave. My flashlight flickered and then it went out. I stood in the darkness, clicking the button, but nothing happened. I figured the batteries had to have run out. I unscrewed the battery cap, switched the position of the batteries, and the flashlight flickered on, but the light was very faint. It spilled over what was clearly a several-day-old deer carcass lying on the ground. Its head was nowhere to be seen, though. Zach started retching and coughing into his sleeve.
"Do you think a bear lives here or something?"
he said between his coughs. My flashlight died again. The darkness was absolute this time. The stench filling my nostrils made it hard to breathe. I called out again to Major. I heard Zach fiddling with his camera.
"Here."
He moved in front of me. The camera flashed, lighting up the hallway for a split second.
"It'll help some, but not much,"
he said.
"Maybe we should go back for more lights."
I shook my head, even though it was pointless in the dark. I heard a yelp of fear and pain from up in the distance. We kept walking down the hallway, careful to step around the deer. Every 3 seconds or so, Zach took a picture, lighting up the hallway and the rooms on either side that we passed. Some rooms had pools of fluid spilling into the hallways. Zach stopped suddenly and I ran into his back. He didn't respond, staring at his camera's display.
"What is that?"
he whispered under his breath. Then we heard it. A noise echoed down the hallway, the clicking getting louder. I felt numb. I stared into the blackness, not able to see anything. Zach took another picture and light flashed out. I saw it, whatever it was. It almost looked like a human, but deathly white, pale, and naked. It had unnaturally long arms with claws that extended at least a foot from each finger. I saw something brown all over its chin and chest. I think it must have been dried blood. It was on all fours, staring right at us. I shouted for my brother Zach to run. I grabbed his shoulder and we sprinted back down the hallway that we had came from. I saw one more flash from Zach's camera just in time before stepping into the deer's body. We ran out of the building and I don't know how we made it through the woods and back to the fire, but once we did, we didn't even pause to pack up our things. We jumped into the car and drove out there. All this just happened yesterday. I can't stop thinking about my dog Major. We left him there with whatever that thing was. Every time I think about it, my hands shake. Still, I can't stand the thought of Major out there alone. We're going to have to go back. I would call the police, but what the hell can they do? We were trespassing. So it has to be us. Did you ever have an imaginary friend when you were a kid? Well, I did. His name was Freckles the Clown. He had red fuzzy tufts of hair jutting out of the sides of his head at odd angles. His eyelids were painted blue and his face was painted white. He had a red nose and lots of freckles. The freckles weren't just on his face either, but all over his clothes and arms like a million little mishapped polka dots. Or more like blood splatter. When I walked home from school, Freckles would tag along. I didn't have many friends, only one or two. They had other friends who they spent most of their time with. So, I was left alone with Freckles. We'd splash through the mud puddles together in the spring, make piles of leaves and dive into them in the fall. We'd even make snow forts in the winter and snowmen to guard them. I never had many real friends, but I was never lonely as long as Freckles was around to keep me company. But what I didn't know was that Freckles was a jealous imaginary friend. He didn't like me hanging out with anybody except for him. So, one day at school, I made a friend. A real one, not invisible like Freckles. A kid named Peter started talking to me during recess. We were both playing on the jungle gym when I saw his South Park t-shirt. I complimented him on it and said it was my favorite show, even though technically I wasn't allowed to watch it. Don't tell that to my parents, though. That seemed to be enough information for him to decide I was okay. He told me that a bunch of his friends were coming over that weekend for his birthday party and invited me to come. I looked around to see where Freckles was, since I was always looking for his approval. He was nowhere to be seen. It was like he had just vanished. I told Peter I'd be happy to go to his birthday party. He gave me his address and told me to be there Saturday around noon. An extra invitation was in his backpack and he gave it to me at the end of the day, hastily filled out with my name, misspelled, but that was okay. I was actually invited to a birthday party for the first time in my life. I really couldn't believe it. The rest of the week I was so excited about this birthday party. It was all I talked about. To my parents, my teachers, to everybody willing to listen. Freckles seemed like he was mad at me though. He didn't want to talk about the birthday party. He didn't even want to hear about it. Eventually, he seemed to come around. By Friday night, he was as excited as I was, but not for the same reasons. Saturday finally came and my mom drove me out to Peter's house. She dropped me off and gave me a kiss on the cheek, telling me to be good before driving away. I went inside and found a bunch of kids from my class who were already there, playing pin the tail on the donkey and wearing pointed cardboard hats covered in polka dots.
Hey, look who's here.
Peter said when I got inside. He introduced me to his other friends who pretended to meet me for the first time. It was weird because I had seen all of them at school for years, but they acted like I was new to the neighborhood or something. It didn't bother me though. I was just excited to be included for once.
Did you bring a jacket?
Peter asked.
We're gonna go out into the forest and play paintball with slingshots.
It turned out his mom had bought a jumbo container of paintballs and a dozen slingshots for his birthday party, since that was what he wanted to do more than anything on his special day. What a great mom. I had indeed brought a jacket with me, and I put it on after we had eaten lunch. I was stuffed from the kid-friendly spread consisting of pizza, Pepsi, and ice cream cake. The 10 of us went outside and made our way to the nearby forest. It's funny, these days, stuff like this would probably never fly, giving kids slingshots and projectiles and sending them out into the forest to have fun. But that's how it was back then. Nobody thought anything of it. We all split up for the free-for-all match and agreed we would meet up again where we started, at the entrance of the forest, once an hour had passed or so. The ground was muddy and fallen leaves covered the forest floor as I walked around by myself, no longer feeling so lonely. Everyone had scattered throughout the forest. Strangely though, I didn't see anyone for a while. Even Freckles had disappeared on me. I wondered if maybe he was mad that I was making new friends, but he had seemed excited about the birthday party the day before. It didn't make much sense. The whole hour went by and nobody shot a single paintball, as far as I could tell. There were no joyous yells or playful insults ringing through the trees. It was dead silent, as if even the birds had become mute or had fled the woods entirely. Silence permeated everything, and the sounds of my boots crunching through the leaves was all I could hear. A full hour had passed, so I went uneasily back to the forest entrance, unsure what I would find there. Part of me thought maybe everyone had ditched me and run for the hills, realizing how much of a loser I actually was. Nobody was at the forest entrance, though. All the kids were still out there somewhere, roaming the woods. My unease growing more and more with each step, I began to search for them. I didn't know why, but a knot of worry was growing steadily in my belly, getting larger and heavier by the second. It took a while to find them. They were all together, so that made it easier. I was drawn in by the sound of someone chewing something stringy and wet like an animal. The sounds of teeth snapping cartilage and chewing gristle became even clearer as I drew near. Freckles was crouched and perched on a log like a wild primate. He was covered in blood and stripping the flesh from a piece of bone, licking his lips when he saw me. An overjoyed giggle poured out of him. Around him were the corpses of my new friends. Bloody, ragged, ripped flesh hung from their bones in place where he had taken big bites. Their clothes were ripped and torn from their struggles to escape.
You were right.
He announced when he saw me.
Birthday parties are fun.
I've been abducted by the same UFO 67 times. I finally know what they want from me. The first time it happened, I was 25. The second time, 26. The third time, 27. It happened a lot that year. It's never come as many times as it did that year, but it comes at least once every year. No matter my age, it's always the same. I always know when it's coming, like an aura before a seizure. The same fluctuations in electricity, the same low thrumming, the same overwhelming vibration, feeding first into my feet, then rippling through my entire body as I edge closer to the craft. And then there's those same piercing red lights. By the time the last light flashes on, there's 8 in total. I can't see much else on the body of the craft other than those 8 lights. The first time it happened, I remember thinking it was like 4 giant creatures watching me in the darkness of the night, stalking their prey, or one enormous one seeing me, well, unseen to me. By the time the last light blinks on, I know I'm about to black out. I know I'm about to black out because I always do. It's secondhand nature to me now, a new and eerie kind of muscle memory. I'm 48 years old now. I've been taken 67 times. If it sounds unbelievable to you, I guess I understand. It's difficult for people to believe when they haven't experienced it themselves, to comprehend reality beyond their own immediate experience. I've lost a lot of people to my unbelievable predicament over the years. Friends, family, significant others. I've lost a lot of joy as well. A lot of my life to this. I've lost a lot. But I've also learned a lot too. Mostly, not to talk to people about it. The only people I talk about these abductions anymore are the researchers, the ufologists. They're the only ones who believe me. The others either think it's a weird quirk and pretend to hear me out, or they try to 5150 me. I've been in so many involuntary psychiatric holds that they should have dedicated a damn wing in that hospital for me. I've certainly earned it. It was particularly bad that one year, when I was 27. There were a lot of revolving door psychiatric stays for me that year too. The doctor said that the year was significant. Like I wouldn't know that, because they'd expect to see an onset of schizophrenia around that time. If it was going to come, it'd come now, they clarified. Damn it. So, I am crazy after all. My thoughts, and I ended up taking the pills they were giving me. I took all the pills, all the antipsychotics, then the second blitz of meds piled on to deal with all the side effects that came from such small, unassuming capsules. The dry mouth, the constipation, and the fatigue. None of the extra meds helped with the worst part. The thing I complained about most fell not on deaf ears, but ears that simply couldn't care less. Ears that thought they were better just because they hovered some inches above a crisp white lab coat. The worst part of this, the total loss of creativity, the absolute removal of anything that made life worth living. There were no moments of wonder anymore, just passive observation. I didn't walk through my life. I floated through it, dazed. It was like the entire world was waterlogged, and all of the color had run out of its pages. All of the color, except for the piercing red lights. It was a bad year for me. Things got better though. Marginally better, but still better. When I found the ufologist, it was a chance meeting, and one I felt lucky to have stumbled upon. There was a flyer stapled up at the coffee shop I used to frequent. I used to play my music there. At that point, I only came to listen. Just looking at my guitar made me feel guilty because I couldn't bring myself to love the way it felt in my hands anymore. Because I was grasping at straws just to find the emotion I once used it to express. Anyway, there was a flyer there that caught my eye. There was some sort of paranormal extraterrestrial speaker coming to town. I ripped an info tab off the bottom of the registered. It was a small affair. Not many believers out there, but as soon as the ufologist presented, I knew I needed to talk to them. For the first time in my life, someone believed me. The lead ufologist, Dr. Gray, invited me for a formal interview. I packed a suitcase and flew across the country to meet him and his team. They asked me about my experiences when it had started, what I could remember, For the first time in my life, someone asked probing questions out of genuine interest instead of trying to get me to analyze my false beliefs. For the very first time in my life, a whole group of people listened to me without interjecting, without insisting I must be crazy. For the first time in my life, I was told abductions were real. Dr. Gray advised me to go off my meds if they were bothering me so much. I never took another one of those little life wreckers again. Since then, I felt a lot more stable. The abductions haven't stopped, but they've slowed since that 1 year. When it does happen, I visit Dr. Gray, or he comes to me. His research team is fully invested in me. They want to find out why I've been abducted so many times. Over the years, he's tried to reassure me that the extraterrestrials, or whatever it is responsible for my abductions, likely mean no harm. I try to think the same because there have been times where it honestly feels like they've helped me. Times when I've been sick, so sick I should have been to the hospital but was too scared to go, and I'm almost miraculously cured after an abduction, or the UFO keeps coming until I'm better. Either way, they mean me no harm, or they're keeping me alive or something. I try to think they mean me no harm because I lived to tell the tale so many times. 67 times to be exact. The 67th abduction happened at the start of this year. I knew it was coming as soon as the lights flickered out. I don't even try to fight it anymore. I just walk outside, vibrations start rumbling throughout my body to find the first piercing red lights already on. Lights 2 through 7, right on schedule. The 8th light flashed on and, of course, I would black out. I called Dr. Gray as soon as I found my way back to consciousness in my aching body, laid limp on my bed. It was almost an entire 24 hours later. He scheduled a red-eye flight to see me. I barely slept that night. Dr. Gray noted how tired I looked when I let him in the next morning. He put on a pot of hot coffee in the kitchen as I eased my bones into a chair at the table. We sat there in a comfortable silence as he found the mugs in the cabinet, pulled the cream from the fridge. He's been here so many times. I didn't even have to tell him where to find my stuff, nor do I have to tell him I'm absolutely useless to interview until I've had a cup of coffee. 2, if you really want me to be on my best behavior. He placed the steaming mug in front of me, then his own cup at the other seat. He's the only one who ever really sits there anymore. If it weren't for Dr. Gray, I probably would have chunked it years ago. We sat quietly until I'd finished my first mug. Dr. Gray refilled it before he clicked on his tape recorder and began the questions.
This is Dr. Gray with Subject 11. It is January 4th, 2021, and it is currently 9 a.m.
I smirked. Always so official on tape, when our relationship had grown friendly over the years.
Tell me about the abduction.
I relayed much of what I've already told you here. The electricity, the vibration, the sounds, the lights, and of course the blackout. Sometimes I vaguely remember what happens once I'm actually aboard the craft, but it feels more like a dream than reality. It's less of an out-of-body experiences as much as it is a what even is my body experience. What I do remember feels so much like it's ripped straight out of Hollywood that it makes it unbelievable to skeptics. I'm lying down, my back on a cold metal surface. My vision is blurry, and I'm blinded by a bright overhead light. Even when I do wake up on the craft, I know to squint my eyes closed now. Even with my eyes closed, though, I feel the poking and prodding. My skin is pricked. There are needles. Things are drawn from or injected into my body, more likely drawn, because Dr. Gray has never found foreign substances in my body after he runs labs on me. He does, however, find prick marks in the physical examinations.
Did you wake up this time?
I tipped my mug to my lips, closing my eyes to take in the comforting aroma as I did my best to scan my memories. All I found in my brain was a nasty ache. No, I don't think so. Nodding, Dr. Gray scribbled some notes down on his legal pad. He's such a meticulous person, all record keeping and probing questions.
Okay. What were you doing when the abduction began?
I racked my brain again, but my memory is often at least somewhat compromised each time. Not that I do much of anything anymore anyway. I think I was heating up a TV dinner and I just put a movie on and Dr. Gray cut me off.
Having nausea this time?
I shook my head no.
Good.
I opened my mouth to continue, but Dr. Gray cut me off again.
Have you been experiencing any erectile dysfunction? EB.
Blinking, I stared through him, sure that my exhausted mind was playing tricks on me, right? Dr. Gray grinned, breathing a shy laugh.
I'm sorry, Dave. I don't mean to be crass. I've just been talking with some other subjects recently, and that appears to be a common experience for falling abductions. I figured I'd ask since you've had so many.
I busted out laughing. Well, damn. I hope not.
I hope not, too.
He replied, his broad smile splitting his face.
Please, continue.
There wasn't much to say. Other than the headache, I felt fine. Really, I was just tired. I disrobed for the physical exam, then Dr. Gray ran some tests on me. He released me with a clean bill of health. Generally, this is how it always goes. How it's always been for the past couple of decades. It was such a standard abduction and standard visit following that the whole thing felt right into place with the rest of them. It's eerie how comfortable the whole thing has become to me. But something happened last night that threw my entire understanding of the abductions into question. I was nestled in my spots on the couch, the spot that's gradually worn away around my body so that I sink right in. It's as unique to me as a fingerprint. I had my laptop perched on my knees, just aimlessly scrolling through the internet. I came across a news headline about a new medication that intrigued me. Not for any particular reason, I was just bored. I clicked on it, half reading it until I noticed an oddly familiar quote.
When asked if he'd experienced erectile dysfunction as a side effect of the medication, one participant exclaimed,
Well, damn. I hope not. I just sat there, half absorbed by my couch, staring at the screen. I tried to rationalize it away, thinking it must be a common thing for men to say when asked about the functional status of their dick. I found the author of the study, not Dr. Gray, thank God, and plugged his name and the title of the original study into my search engine. It came back behind a paywall. To my surprise, there were dozens of articles authored by this same guy in the same journal. I figured it was a worthwhile purchase, if only to give me something to do for a while. I had a couple $100 burning a hole in my pocket anyway, a gift from Dr. Gray for my time. We had a follow-up interview on the phone earlier this week anyways. The papers were difficult to read, with all their cold and clinical terminology, but I think I got the gist. This doctor and his research team had conducted more experimental drug studies than I even thought possible over the past several decades. At first, I was only intrigued by the subject matter. As I kept reading, however, I couldn't mask the growing fear, not even for myself. Each study, each drug, and each of their listed side effects, they all seemed so familiar. Even more familiar was the description of subjects in each study, especially in the smaller studies. There were even a few case studies where the sole subject matched me in every single descriptor. Even worse was the fact that this person was constantly referred to throughout paper after paper after paper as Subject 11. Subject 11 had been through a lot. He'd battled several diseases that, as far as I was aware, I never even had.
A 27-year-old Subject 11 presented with antibiotic-resistant syphilis, onset 2 years previous.
The year of my first abduction, it took years to resolve the infection.
A 47-year-old Subject 11 was one of the first test subjects for a new vaccine. Weeks later, he was exposed to the targeted fires.
The timeline checked out with my abductions last year. Subject 11 was poked and prodded and experimented on, while I was always released with a clean bill of health. I haven't slept yet. I stayed up all night reading my secret medical history. I went back to the original news article. It's been pulled. You'd think that, with how prolific this scientist is, he'd be much better known, famous even. Well, you think that, wouldn't you? Reading eventually turned to writing this all down. I need someone else to know what's happened to me. I've been silenced for so long. A silence learned from not being believed. I know what's happened to me now, and I won't hold my tongue any longer. There are other subjects out there. Please, if you are one of them, I'm begging you to contact me. I can't live like this any longer. I lost trust in the only person I've ever found it in. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet, who I'm going to tell. All I know is this. The next time the lights flicker, the air starts to thrum, and the vibration buzzes throughout my body, I'll be ready. I'll be ready before the 8th. I know the real reason why Silent Hill's PT was canceled. Those were the words I read from the email I received. For those who aren't into video games, I'll give you a Cliff Notes background. From 2012 to 2015, there was a new Silent Hill game in development. In addition to noted game designer Hideo Kojima, many auteurs of horror were involved, including manga artist Junji Ito and filmmaker Guillermo del Toro. In August of 2014, a playable teaser was released, simply titled PT. It was widely acclaimed and generated a ton of hype surrounding what fans were sure would be the best installments of the Silent Hill saga. And then, in 2015, Japanese entertainment conglomerate Konami suddenly canceled the project. Amid widespread criticism from fans, PT was removed from the PlayStation Store and made impossible to reinstall. Initial news reported that Konami was dissatisfied with the direction in which Kojima was taking the franchise. As time went on, the news changed its tune, saying that the game was canceled due to corporate reshuffling at Konami. Both of these statements are false. I know because I was involved in the game's production. If you look at the Wikipedia page for Silent Hill, you'll see under cancellation that video game website Polygon reported getting an anonymous tip confirming that the game had been canceled. I was the one who gave them that anonymous tip. I did it because I need people to know the truth. Of course, no one believed me, so it was never actually published. So, I decided to send the story to someone at random. Maybe you can help me. The truth of the matter is, the game was canceled because, to put it simply, we went too far. Early on in development, someone involved with the production of PT decided to do something a little different. They designed it so that the main ghost, Lisa, would follow the player throughout the game, causing scary noises and shadows throughout the teaser. Of course, the player only looks forward, so the model of Lisa is never actually seen. There was a lot of talks about wasting time developing a model that would constantly follow the player without being seen, when it could have easily been done with simple sound design and effects. But ultimately, they decided it was best just to leave be. Big mistake. As the teaser was developed, many of us, of course, would test it to make sure it was going well. Anyone who played it was immensely excited at first. We knew we had a massive hit on our hands. As time went on, though, the people who play tested the teaser started coming into work exhausted. At first, we just figured they were overworked. Creating a video game is extremely intricate work, and developers spend long hours trying to perfect every little detail, especially with a release of this magnitude. And then, one day, one of the developers, whose name I won't disclose here, didn't come in at all. Those of us who knew him were immediately worried. He hasn't been the kind of guy to just up and miss work. We called him numerous times, but there was no answer. Eventually, one of the developers, who was friends with the missing guy, called his wife to ask whether or not he was okay. After the call, it was said the man's face was a picture of shock. The man hadn't come into work because the previous night, he'd gone down into his basement and hung himself from one of the rafters. Worry turned into shock, and shock turned into sorrow, sorrow into grief. The man had no history of depression or anything that could have led to his death. A few weeks later, another person didn't show up. The first death was still fresh in our minds, so we tried to prepare ourselves for what we assumed was inevitable. Sure enough, about an hour into what would have been their shift, We got a call from the person's family. The night before, they had made their way onto the roof of their apartment building and jumped. I was there when we got the news directly. If I have to be honest, and I do, I think a good many of us knew in the back of our minds what was going on, but we didn't want to accept it. At one point, someone from the Public Security Intelligence Agency, otherwise known as the Japanese FBI, visited to interview us and get any info they could about the people we'd lost. I'm pretty sure they were dissatisfied with what they got, but while I was talking to them, I couldn't help but feel like they weren't telling us everything. I mean, I guess I should have expected as much. What intelligence agency tells its people everything? But it definitely aroused suspicion. It wasn't until 3 more people died that we got the email. Before one of the others had died, they sent something to our office's email address. I never actually got to see for myself, but one of the people who handles our emails is a friend of mine, and she did get to see it. According to her, it simply read, "She won't stop following me. I can feel her breath on the back of my neck. I can't keep doing this. Goodbye." It wasn't too long after that when we got word that the game was being canceled. All of our progress over the 3 years was gone. And at that point, I think most of us were more relieved than disappointed. Whatever was going on needed to be stopped. And damn the expense or time that was put into it. I couldn't bring myself to go to the first few funerals. I know that's selfish, but what can I say? I didn't want it to be real. Eventually, I made the effort to go to the funeral of the man who had sent the email. His wife was inconsolable. It wasn't until halfway through the service that she managed to get any kind of words out. I went up to her to pay my respects, and out of nowhere, I remember asking her why she thought it had happened. She was obviously taken aback by my answer, but being the strong woman she is, she wiped her tears and told me. She said that for a year or so before his death, the man had a lot of trouble sleeping. He had never had issues with insomnia before, but suddenly he was lucky to get as much as 3 hours in. As time went on, he just got worse and worse. He became frightened of his home after dark. Sometimes he'd even go stay at a hotel just to avoid being in the house after sundown. He started rapidly losing weight. His eyes were in a constant glaze, as if he was constantly staring into something beyond what anyone else could see. The one time his wife got up the nerve to ask what was wrong, the man uttered one word: "Lisa." It wasn't long after that he'd passed away. The wife told me point blank that she wondered if she'd been responsible, but I assured her she wasn't. I gave her a hug and said goodbye. I don't think any of us were surprised when PT was removed from the PlayStation Store and made unable to download. I think they did it for the right reasons and not for problems with public reactions. Although none of us ever said anything about it to each other, I think we all knew. We let something loose. I didn't believe it at first. How could I? It just sounds crazy. Then, the other night, as I was making my way towards my bedroom, I felt the unmistakable tingle of cold, faded breath down the back of my neck. I turned around with a start. Nothing was behind me. I know what's to come, and I am completely and utterly terrified. The email ended there. I couldn't make heads or tails of it at first. I was sure it was a friend playing a prank or something. I archived the email and pretty much forgot all about it. Then in 2019, an indie developer named Lance McDonald used what he called camera patches. This allows the player in PT to look 360 degrees. As it turns out, after a certain point in the game, the ghost Lisa actually does follow directly behind you throughout the rest of the teaser. That reminded me of the email, which I'm really glad I saved. I still don't know exactly what this means, and I'm all the more afraid because of it.